Hello, everybody.
Hi, I'm Tom Zee.
I'm Zee Garcia, and welcome back to our continuing series here as we are, I'm going to say, cavorting through the decade. I don't know.
Twirling through the years.
Twirling through the years sounds like a cute series. I think Disney Plus has that.
That's we're getting picked up by Disney Plus. That's our big news.
Oh, yeah. Psych. Is it April 1st?
If that was the truth, we'd be sitting here in some suits. And, hey, man.
Big Mickey ears. That's what would be happening. We're going to be talking today about 2016, and we'll be following the same format, talking about some of the top games of the year. After that, we'll take a look at some trends that we've been able to sort of notice. And again, these are getting a little bit closer, so it is harder to find trends because, well, largely these years aren't long ago enough to develop a visible trend. Then we're going to talk about some of our picks, some of our favorites from the year here, and then we will end with your picks in the comments, and we'll chat a little bit about, whether you spotted any trends or just, games you liked from that year. So that's going to be it. What do you say, Mr. Vassal, that we take a look at some games? Oh, that's magic.
All righty. Well, as we get closer to now, a lot more games hit. There's 14 games from this year in the top 100, and the top 3 of the top 10, and then the top 4 games here are all very huge games. Terraforming Mars is pretty interesting for a couple reasons. One, it's a heavier Euro game. Also, 47,000 people.
Oh, it's a huge, huge hit, yeah.
This is a game that helped put Stronghold on the map. They've done a lot of games up to this point, but this was definitely their biggest hit for sure. Then right underneath that, Star Wars Rebellion.
Another Star Wars game from Fantasy Flight Games.
What's interesting about this one was that when this came out, we were like, wait a minute. I thought they couldn't do board games.
Right.
And they were like, well, this is a miniatures game on a board.
With board game rules.
Yeah, I don't actually know what all the rules were. I know that they were paying a licensing fee to Hasbro somehow, some way. They couldn't really talk about the deal, but something happened there. But very popular game. Then the game that definitely put Stonemaier on the map, because Viticulture had done well.
It did.
But Scythe just blew up.
It was a huge hit, yeah, right.
Everybody was playing Scythe.
Different scale of hit.
Yeah, so this one still is extremely popular, as you can see, still number 10 here on the thing. Actually, I'm surprised. If you had asked me to guess where these were, I would have thought Scythe would have been number 3. Especially over Star Wars Rebellion. The only thing I could say is I don't think you're going to play Star Wars Rebellion without going into it knowing what you're going into.
Right.
So by very nature, it's going to be ranked higher. While Scythe, anyway.
That could be. Scythe was also had a lot of word of mouth. So a lot of people tried it who possibly it wasn't their speed. Not that many people, with considering how highly it rated, but I could consider that feasible.
Great Western Trail. This one here is Alexander Pfister's top game, one of the bigger Euro games that's done very well. Arkham Horror, the card game. I didn't realize this was 16. This a little surprised me a little. For some reason, I thought it came out like in 17.
You thought it was newer than
that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's been around for a while now, and it's still being heavily supported. Tons of content is available for it. This is pretty sure a mega hit for them at this point. And I'm a bigger fan of it than you, obviously, and I really like it. I think it's a superb design, tons of theme, tons of, innovation in a way. It's a very clever, engaging game. A little long still. They can't help themselves. Fantasy Flight Games makes long games. But just like they continued pumping out the Star Wars game, and you could have the 5th game be great, there wasn't a tapering off effect.
Sure.
The Arkham card game, I thought, wasn't a tick up. It was like, wow, this is amazing. This is not Eldritch Horror, which is fine, but really Arkham Horror 2.0, this is not that. This was unique in many ways, kind of based on the Lord of the Rings collectible card game, but it brought a lot of new things to the table.
These are my rankings, by the way, so I'm not as big a fan of a Z, but I only played it once. I didn't review it. I just played it. Feast for Odin, that was a pretty big one. A return to form from Rosenberg of sorts. This actually, I think, is the last big game he's done that has gotten this kind of critical praise.
Right.
Was in 16. Mansions of Madness, definitely, as a second edition, this was a huge thing because it introduced the app thing, which we talked about earlier with XCOM.
Yeah,
Here they'd used it in a much better way, I thought.
Right.
To the point where it's hard to imagine doing this one without the app.
Well, you have first edition if you really want to test that out, and most people will say second edition is just easier to play, easier to not make a mistake also.
Mechs vs. Minions was a super interesting thing. It was made by Riot Games, one of the biggest companies in the world, probably the biggest computer company, huge company. I never even heard of these guys. And they emailed me and asked me to come consult on this. They also brought in Quinns from Shut Up and Sit Down. And then they launched this. They showed it to us at Gen Con of 2016. We had it for a while, and it just was like, wow, this is an example of if you have all the money you want and you can make the board game the way you want to make it. That's what these guys did.
Right. And they were smart enough to not just make this a game that wasn't, I don't want to say vetoed, but they brought in people, like you're saying, and they had enough eyes on it to make a game that's not just about their video game, but that was a good game too.
Yeah.
And you can tell this was very, very popular at the time. And also, for how much content you got in the box, extremely inexpensive. They could do that because they weren't worried about making a profit on the board game, I remember there being a little bit of a discussion talking about how, this game there's so much, it's so well produced, it's so inexpensive, this is going to change the industry. It's like, well, not unless you were coming into the board game industry with millions of dollars.
Right.
They're not worried about turning a profit on this.
It didn't do it. The only thing that this might have done is it definitely put game trays
That's true.
as something I knew what they were.
Yeah.
Clank was a pretty big deal here because it used deck building in a way that wasn't actually that innovative, but made me go, what? This is something different.
Right.
And then some similar to that, got some love. They re-released Agricola, Pandemic Iberia, which has been on special for a very long time.
That's right. Yeah, Pandemic Iberia was the first special engagement around the world series that they were doing to coincide with their pandemic tournament, like the sort of world tournament that they do. And they intended to have a pandemic game come out each year tied to wherever the finals were happening. This was the first one, and then they had the Rising Tide one, and they had the Roman one. They sort of gave up on this now. They said we're not continuing this, and they rebranded this whole. They have to come out when the tournament, where the tournament took place, and all this
Pandemic
stuff.
Antarctica.
Yeah, but this was one I remember distinctly running for at Essen that year, like a dumb fool. It's everywhere.
Yeah. So, as a side note here, sometimes people say, I can't believe they only spent like a second per game here. There's about several thousand games coming out a year at this point.
It gets harder. There's more and more good games.
We can't go over all of them. And yes, we're giving cursory nods to them, but it's just the year in overview, not these games. Yokohama, Lorenzo, both very good Euro games. Inish, the third in the trilogy of Cyclades and Kemet. This one was more divisive. Some people really liked it. Others, like me, thought it was okay. Santorini was a surprising game because for an abstract game, they don't normally get as much love as this one got. 20,000 ratings is a big deal.
And this is a reprint of an older game, too. A lot of people, I think, don't know that. Santorini is a reprint, like the most amazing transition from a first edition of something to a second edition. If you look at the original game, it looks like a piece of art, but it's very minimalistic, and it does not look like an expensive product. Santorini, this version, my goodness, what a stunning looking abstract game. Just amazing production.
The Vinhos Deluxe Editions ushered in the age of Eagle Griffin making big deluxe, beautiful Euro games. And I think this was I didn't mention this in trends, but this was kind of a turning point this year where Euro games didn't have to look like garbage. They were starting to make them look really nice.
Right.
Captain Sonar was very popular. Sushi Go Party took Sushi Go in a tin and a lot more content for a really low price. That's what I remember about that one.
Well, Game Right consistently did that. They came out with, Forbidden Desert and Forbidden Island in very inexpensive packages. They could do that, and they were good at it.
Hero Realm Secret Hitler got a lot of buzz for being it was the first major game that Cards Against Humanity had released since Cards Against Humanity.
Right.
So that got some buzz. Also, the name, around it. The social deduction game a lot of people liked. Flamme Rouge came out this year. It doesn't seem like it's 2016, but there you go. Tyrants of the Underdark was another deck building game. Deck building was doing different things this year.
Deck building, this was the year that deck building finally decided to add a board, it seemed.
Okay,
we got the card part figured out. What else are we going to throw in here? How about a board? Clank did it supremely well, I thought. Tyrants of the Underdark, not as interesting. This was
it worked okay, I thought.
The board felt like an addition to something that would have worked without it in many ways. Clank, you could tell that it was a little more cohesive.
Role Player came out to not a huge amount of praise, but got a slow burn as time went by.
It did, and that company, Thunderworks, now has put out several games in this world. Yeah.
King Domino was the Spiel des Jahres winner.
Very simple game, and the award has trended simpler and simpler throughout this decade, I would say.
That's true. I remember this year brought it to light, especially. I remember thinking, wow, that's a really light game to have won the award.
Right.
Manhattan Project Energy Empire kind of flew under the radar, being a very different game. In fact, it was almost misnamed.
I guess so.
I know that it's in the same universe, just an extremely different game.
It is. It is a different game, and there are 4,000, ratings of it only, but it is highly rated, and it's 212 ranked. It's a great game. It's my favorite from that line of games, but you're right. It is different from the other ones considerably. A really engaging Euro game.
Other things in here.
Evolution Climate came out, which evolved it a little bit.
And Quadropolis did not get a ton of love.
It did not.
I liked it a lot, actually, but it just did not do as well as some of the other Days of Wonder. There's the Reign of Cthulhu. Now, this one actually came out before Iberia.
It did.
This was the first in their non-normal pandemics, although this is not included in their Around the World. It's very confusing.
This was just a spin-off, yeah. And it is a different game, but it is just a spin-off.
Dominion.
Second edition, yeah.
Mystic Vale, Dominion Second Edition. Mystic Vale, Imhotep. This was this the Kenner Spiel? No, this was nominated for the Spiel and did not win. I think
so. This might have
won
the
next following
year. Yeah.
It's like every other year we say that. This was the year.
Yeah, because they'll look at what came out the previous year, where that cutoff date is a little tricky.
The Colonist was essentially the last gasp of Mayfair, or one of their last games they did before Mayfair disappeared. Sad thing, but they were kind of on life support at this point. Star Wars Destiny, we thought was going to be much bigger than it ended up being. Right. A collectible dice game. Fantasy Flight this was weird because Fantasy Flight had basically said we were not going to do collectible card games anymore. Yeah, they moved to the living card game.
That was a big push for them. It was almost a rebellion against this blind buy. You buy what you know you're going to get with living card games. This is our term. Living card games. Don't copy us or we'll sue you. And then they went back and made a collectible dice game.
I don't know. It sold so well that they couldn't keep it in stock, which instantly caused it to become less popular, because you can't play a game like this if you can't get the dice for it.
Right.
The exact same thing happened to Dice Masters a few years prior. Same thing happened here. Very popular game, so popular no one played it because you couldn't get it. And then by the time they got the second wave out and third wave, it kind of, I think, are they still making it? I don't know, but it's definitely not where it once was.
Right.
Conan came out. Now this one's an important one to talk about later, just because as time came out, Conan was a Kickstarter game that for a while we weren't sure it was ever going to show up in stores. To the point where, as their second one, Batman, they were like, ain't gonna even be in stores.
Right.
And that was a new thing at that point in time.
I want to mention Junk Card briefly also as a follow-up to Flick 'em Up from Pretzel Games.
Right.
And this was this established a trend. They're like, oh, okay, now we get what you do, Pretzel Games. You make big wooden boxes filled to the brim with wooden bits. This one was a dexterity game also, but a more traditional stacking one. Great game.
We should also mention here Blood Bowl, the 2016 edition here. Games Workshop, somewhere around, it was either 2016 or 2015, I can't remember. Me, Z, and Sam were sitting in a room, and a box from Games Workshop showed up, and I said, why is this here? Games Workshop doesn't send out review copies ever, but they did, and they started to consistently at that point, and it just blew our minds. They moved into board gaming with a vengeance.
Right. Yeah, there was a big shakeup in the company. If nothing else, if not of personnel, which I think it was, but even if you don't consider that, also just of mentality. The idea of, moving into a new market, approaching the fan base in a different light. All of these things were, something they hadn't done in a long time, right? And they just joined the sort of gaming as a whole again, as opposed to being board gaming, Warhammer. So, absolutely. Tons of games came out from them.
Oh, so many games. Cry Havoc was a big. Ignacy moved into miniatures briefly. Valeria Card Kingdoms was the beginning of Daily Magic Games, which was the folks from Clever Mojo had moved over and started this new company up. Vast was the first game from Leader Games, who now, Vast did okay for them, but Root later on will do much better. The Networks from Gilhova's company here, Formal Ferret Games, or is that Formal Ferret, right?
Yes.
That started out there.
I know we skipped a Feld game. It's okay.
Well, that's actually one of the least known Feld games there is as time goes by. Awkward Guess technically came out in 2016, but I don't think anyone played it in 2016, including me. So,
right.
Star Trek Ascendancy was a pretty big game that came out this year. It was supposed to be this is Star Trek Imperium, essentially.
Yeah, sure.
And it was also very divisive. Some people really like it, and others were okay on it.
Adrenaline was a big deal this year when it came out. It was
That's
sort of
true, although
a first-person shooter kind of game from CGE, and it was appealing to a lot of people. It's had a different vibe about it.
We got The Others, Automobiles, Fabled Fruit, Cottage Garden. Cottage Garden was a game that kind of came out of nowhere. It was a game store that published it. Stronghold picked it up and worked with them. World's Fair 1893 was a game I thought would be much bigger because it was so easy to play and didn't. Yeah. Ryan Lockett had a small... Islebound was a very good game in my opinion, but did not do as well as his other games.
It didn't take off, yeah.
Fields of Green was a reworking of... the spaceship drafting game.
Yeah, it's Among the
Artemis
Stars.
Project. Among the Stars, yes.
Yeah.
Via Nebula is a really beautiful game, and we thought, Mart Wiles is back with simpler games. And he was. He was just jumping from company to company.
He was. I think this was... I don't think he's gone back on what he used to do. Well, they reworked, Lancaster, the whatever those are called. But for the most part, he has been making lighter games lately. And by lighter, we mean as opposed to what he was doing before. They're not that light.
Ice Cool was a big deal from Brain Games. This was the first Ticket to Ride that I thought was much worse than...
Yeah, Ticket to Ride Rails and Sails definitely feels now, in retrospect, like a misstep.
Well, I thought it felt that way when I played it.
I know, but you didn't have any hindsight. You just strongly willed like that.
New Angeles is a game that you'll notice I never ever did get around to playing because it's like 4 hours. This was one that a lot of people were like, woo, it's fantastic, but just did not take off. And the days of big, sprawling, original IP Fantasy Flight games were over.
That was the day
that was
died.
It. I think so. Because now it's all IPs and...
No, I think so too, 100%. New Angeles was their last push for something of theirs to begin a universe with, and it definitely felt that way, right?
Well,
they were like, this is a fleshed out world. We can put multiple games in here. But they came out of the gate and stumbled and fell, and that was it. They were like, you know what? Forget it. Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and the other, they do like 3 things. That's what we're doing. That's it. We're not trying this anymore.
We should also mention Happy Salmon. Even though it doesn't have a lot of ratings on here, they certainly marketed this one out.
Sure.
This won a lot of awards, a lot of buzz, just like the Ice Cool game. Tides of Madness did pretty well for Ignacy, considering how small it was. In fact, let me cross your eyes here real quickly. Let's see what the most rated games of the year were. Terraforming Mars is obviously going to be high up there with 47. That's very rare for the number one rated game and the highest rated game to be the same.
Sure.
Inside also there, King Domino. Let's see, anything different here than was on the other list? No, pretty much the same.
Names, pictures. We hadn't gotten to it yet, I think, did we?
Yeah, we did. Codenames Pictures was a very obvious follow-up to Codenames, and it did very well. So there's a lot of different games that came out this year, and again, I know some people are going to be upset because there's some that we did not go over, but we're just at that point now.
You can mention them when we get to your picks.
That's right. Think about that.
Let's go ahead and talk about some trends here. I'm going to give you a pen, and I am going to start off with escape room games. We're definitely taking off this year. There were a bunch of different series that began this year. You were mentioning you think the first one was Escape Room in a Box, the werewolf experiment.
That was the first one that was, actually, that one came out after all the other ones on the list did. It was Kickstarted. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got on board that.
Sure,
I backed it.
Right.
And then it took a while for it to come out. It was very good when it came out. But the first one I played was the Escape the Manor Stargazers.
Yeah. That's
from Game
Escape the Room Mystery at the Stargazers Manor. And Escape Room in a Box, the werewolf one, was a very sort of didactic one. Lots of things to manipulate and all of that stuff. But that idea kept shrinking. Is still shrinking to this day. They keep coming out with these escape room games that just seem to get smaller and smaller. They're really trying to condense them. And so you had Exit came out this year. Escape Room, the game, is one that you could find at Target. Still can find it at Target. And it came with a few scenarios in there. It had this big plastic decoder thing that you would put batteries in, and it would make noises and all that, count down. So yeah, this was the first year that escape room games became a thing, and I think it's honestly a reaction to, two things. Obviously, escape rooms and how fun that was, and escape rooms have been around for years, but they were finally starting to...
They weren't even that old, though. I didn't hear about escape rooms until, 2014.
But they had been around for years. They just weren't in the popular, the population's consciousness yet.
I guess I had not heard
They had been around for a long time, and now they were bubbling to the top. They were about to break that threshold of, awareness. And so board games jumped into that. That's the first thing. But I also think there were a big reaction to these, games like Time Stories. Story-driven games with a lot of story and a few puzzles. And by this point, folks were starting to sort of get sick of the story part.
Which is weird, because I think that's going to come around full circle.
Sure. It'll swing back, right? But folks just wanted the puzzles. I want the puzzles with some theme, some story. I don't want to play, I want to play the Uwe Rosenberg, pentamino thing, right? That's just puzzles. There is no theme. There is no story. But it was too much of the story the other way. And so, Escape Room Maze settled in the middle and gave you pretty much puzzles with window dressing.
Yeah, but that was, if you remember, when we first played Time Stories, the most exciting part of it for us was that final puzzle.
Yeah, and the rest was
and then
a
as
lot
time
of
came
window
by,
dressing.
I was like, wow, I can get just the puzzles.
Right, exactly.
Another thing I think that happened during this year was there was a lot of innovation. I guess a stronger word would be experimentation. People were trying new and different things, and sometimes it went over pretty well. We saw a lot of different things, like Beast of Balance was a cool thing, where you had a device that worked with your iPad and the pieces would read, and it worked really well. But we also saw some big innovation failures over the course of the year. The biggest failure of the year easily was Seafall. Seafall was a game that we got a copy of at Gen Con 2016. People were threatening to steal it from me.
And you got cut. You got stabbed, right? Remember
that? I actually hit it.
Dark days.
Because it was that popular. We brought it back. We were like, wow. We had played Pandemic Legacy and Risk Legacy. Now we were going to see a legacy game that was built from the ground up.
Yes.
And it just bombed. you can watch our reviews of it. You can see us sliding down.
Sure. Well, and you can also, find it online for about $15, $20 now.
And some people liked it, don't get me wrong, but I think it's safe to say it was a pretty big failure. It just did not do very well. And that wasn't the only failure. There were other games that the World of Yoho, which you put your phone on the table and moved it around, and your ships would attack each other. Sounds like a great idea in theory. And I like it a lot.
It's a good game. There's no denying it was a neat game.
Phone runs out of battery. Phone better be charged.
Sure.
Need to be hooked up to the internet and all hooked up to the same internet. The internet needs to be strong. And there was a few problems with it, and it never took off. There was one big innovation that came out this year that I think people don't realize, and it was Star Wars Destiny. Not the dice, not the game, but the dice. Because when I first got the Star Wars Destiny dice, I said, wait, this is the cheapo plastic dice. I know these. I use them. I'm going to rub off. And they said, no, we use a new technique. It was like a heat printing or whatever. And it's right. They didn't rub off. And then people started copying that. And nowadays, when I get plastic dice with pictures printed on them, I don't assume they're going to be bad anymore.
Right.
Because whatever that technology was that they figured out definitely happened this year. So that was a big deal, I think, and it's one that people don't look at as much. But like I said, there was a lot of cool things that people tried. Mystic Veil was innovation that did work. Well, for that one game. They did a couple other games with it.
There were a couple of games that did it. I mean, Gloom had come out long before this.
Sure, but Gloom almost did it as a...
It was a gimmick. It was definitely a gimmick.
Mystic Veil actually worked.
It felt part of the game, for sure. Yeah, it was a time of finding new things to do. One of those, which I'll be talking about, was a very simple thing to do. Not to deny that a lot of work goes into what publishers and designers do, but that was simply republishing a game with a different theme. And this was a big year for that. Reworking something slightly, putting it out again, trying to appeal to a different demographic. I think by now it was clear across the board to publishers mainly that the life cycle of games was getting shorter and shorter. A game would come out, you'd either make a big splash or not. If you really got lucky, like Terraforming Mars, or the game was good, I don't want to say it's all luck, then you could continue to do that. Move over from new game to expansion mode, which you have to do. But if not, you could republish this thing in a couple of years with a new coat of paint and throw that spaghetti at the wall again and see if it stuck this time. There were a bunch of games that did that. Again, I don't want to take away from these games, but you have Hero Realms was basically Star Realms, but fantasy. And this happened a lot with fantasy. And we had 51st State was a reworking of Imperial Settlers, which was itself a reworking of 51st State, the original.
Sure. I always like when I see a reworking of the reworking, but yes.
Yeah. And we had, Fields of Green, as we said, was from Among the Stars. A lot of these moved away from sci-fi. I guess sci-fi can be divisive. Fantasy is not as divisive, And then the other big one, we had also Defenders of the Last Stand, went post-apocalyptic, kind of like Defenders of the Realm. Again, not a one-to-one game, but, some parts were similar. But then the other big re-theme push was Cthulhu. Cthulhu was awakening.
Sure. Well, you'll see as different things come into public domain, and Cthulhu had come into public domain somewhere around this time frame, so anyone can use it, and that's happened. Like just Sherlock Holmes happened, I think, the following year in 17, and just as these things come, it's like
right.
Woo, what can we do now?
Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu came out. Mythos Tales came out this year from a rework of a different game. Tides of Madness, as we said, was a reworking of Tides of Time, kind of a sequel. And there was just a lot of this, what flavor of ice cream do you want? It's like sci-fi, here's the sci-fi version of this. Oh, you like fantasy, here's the fantasy version of this. It's not a bad thing. I do think it dilutes the product lines sometimes, when you can look at something and go, oh, you made the exact same thing in vanilla and chocolate and strawberry. It's like, well, what was the original idea?
Here, the problem with that is you take this game and you're like, okay, here's this game. Oh, I'm going to reskin it. So I reskin it. and then I'll add a twist in the reskin game. I'm like, ooh, I love that twist, but I like this theme better. So then company's like, oh, well, we'll add that in this game too.
Sure.
And then this will be in this game, and I'm like, wait, what's in what game again?
Right.
And I would get confused over that. A good example would be Hero Realms and Star Realms. You remember for a while Sam would say, oh, Hero Realms is better because it has heroes. And Star Realms is like, well, us too. I'm like, well then, but Star Realms has this and this. Hero Realms like, well, we're going to add that back in. I'm like, oh, it got confusing.
Yeah, just, you can get whatever you want. So there you go.
So speaking of confusing, I think one thing that this game pushed towards was simpler games. For sure. We saw this year. Yeah, this year we saw bigger games come out for sure. But things like Imhotep and King Domino said, hey, sometimes people want to play just a really simple game. And again, Happy Salmon and Ice Cool. One's flicking, one's just shouting. You can make fun of these games all you want, but there's definitely an audience for them. Oh, yeah. And I would go to conventions and see people really buzzing about really simple games. Insider, which was a big deal this year, was literally 20 questions with a trader. That's all it was. And yet
as more folks flooded into the hobby, and it was a flood around this year, they wouldn't come in at the top. Nobody went from, I played Yahtzee when I was a kid. I liked that. I haven't played games. Ooh, what's this Terraforming Mars thing? Bam, right? That's most people don't do that. They'll come in and play, see a group playing Happy Salmon. Be like, this is fun. Okay, I thought games were dumb, but this is fun. Or, whatever. King Domino was playing some tiles. Very simple game. So it makes sense. Everybody would then thought, well, then let's get a piece of that pie. And you can tell. This year you could tell. Yeah, I think you're right. That's it for mine. What else you got?
What do you got for hot games of the year?
Oh, so many good games.
Yeah, really, we could go about this for a while. Okay, I got a few.
You mentioned that. Arkham Horror you mentioned.
Well,
we talked about Manhattan Project, Energy Empire, we talked about. I'm going to talk about two others then. I'm going to talk about The Others. The Others.
Big shocker there.
Is my favorite come on game to date. And it is, I think it did everything they do well and everything that Eric Lang, the designer, does well, where he has a game that's very thematic, or at least schlocky thematic. There's a lot of, stuff going on. But then the gameplay is fairly simple. He knows how to streamline.
Right.
He's worked on collectible card games and all that stuff for many, many years, and you got to find a nice balance between new ideas, but not wall of text on a card. That's tricky. You got to be good for that. And The Others really nailed that for me. It was, the gameplay is not overwhelming in my opinion, but it's going to be thematic. It's going to be engaging. It's an all versus one game. Very dark theme, yeah, which I like in that game. And the game just appeals to me. It's also about 90 minutes, at most. So it's not going to outstay its welcome. Really one of my favorites. And it's a game that just, some of the great games we mentioned this year didn't get a lot of love. Energy Empire being one of them. The Others is one of their least, one of their most underperforming games.
Actually, Eric Lang told me about The Others way back in the day. He's like, oh, you're going to wait, you see this game. It's going to be gross. I was like, all right.
He probably did say that.
He did.
Anyway, I like it a lot. If you've never given it a try, just because you've always seen it, maybe discounted somewhere or not getting a lot of front and center attention, I would say it's a good time to give it a shot.
You said you had two?
That's one. The other one I have is Beyond Baker Street. Did you ever play Beyond Baker Street? Do you remember? It's kind of like Hanabi.
No. Oh, I did play that one. Well, not kind of like Hanabi. It's really like Hanabi.
It's very like Hanabi with a theme, yeah. And it had the Sherlock Holmes thing. So I think it was around the same time that, again, Sherlock Holmes was available. People could just start using Sherlock Holmes in their designs and whatever. And it's just a really neat concept. Yes, it takes that Hanabi innovation and reuses it. But in a clever way, in an interesting way, with a cool theme, with special powers for the players, with artwork, and I really like it. I think, again, underappreciated. Things get lost when there's so many games coming out, but it's a neat one, and I really have enjoyed it. Still got my copy of it.
A few that I would mention, we already mentioned a lot of them. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Shadows of the Past was a game that I thought was a lot of fun. I didn't expect a lot from IDW, honestly, but it was a really solid, great game. Yeah. Another one that I really liked was Captain Sonar.
Sure.
Felt so different. I mentioned innovative. This one felt this whole team versus team thing. It felt like it should not have worked, and yet it did.
Right.
And then Project Elite. That one came out this year. That one kind of just blew me away. Again, the guy was like, look, there's a board full of miniatures. I was like, yeah, I've seen lots of games like that. He's like, you can throw them off the board. I was like, tell me more. And
Anarchy, you say?
No,
it's a real-time game also, like Captain Sonar.
And the problem was, and I found that at this point that this whole cooperative or team-based speed things,
yeah.
I really enjoyed. Because when you're on the clock and by yourself, it's all frenetic, and you're like, but when you're working with other people, I don't know, it just feels better.
You liked Escape back when it came out, I remember distinctly.
That's true, but Project Elite let you pause. Like, all right, go. All right, I went pause.
Sure.
Now what are we going to do? And
right, you could plan a bit.
It felt better that way. What are yours? Tell us in the comments what your games were. Someone already said Mechs vs. Minions. A lot of people like that. Now people are talking about the others. A lot of people here joined the hobby in 2016, so welcome. And thanks for being with us for the past 3 years. But what are games? There's Hero Realms and Star Realms is a toss-up. Sure, and in fact, they even came out with a Cthulhu version of this. What was that called?
Oh, it wasn't Cthulhu Realms?
Maybe it was Cthulhu Realms, yeah. Millennium Blades, yeah. That was a game about collecting cards, which sounded like it shouldn't work, but it did. Also came with paper money, but it was stacks of paper money, so it was okay.
Cool. It's a really cool money, yeah.
A lot of people, I know a lot of people's top games came from this year, especially if you have Great Western Trail and things like that, for sure. Mare Nostrum, the reprint of that game from Academy Games was really fantastic.
It was a big get from them. I remember distinctly them being like, we're reprinting Mare Nostrum. It's like, whoa. Because that game, before they reprinted, was extremely expensive to get. And the expansion for it, Mythology, way more expensive than the board game.
Yeah, that's
true. Which I always thought was kind of interesting. But so, yeah, this was a good one to bring back. I never thought the look of the new one was as captivating as the original game, but it was back, and there were all sorts of goodies.
This person says it might be the first year of too many games solidified for the Dice Tower. There are at least 6 games I thought Tom would enjoy and still hasn't played. Sure, you're right. I couldn't get to all the games this year, and I never will.
That's hard.
Probably.
Yeah.
And every new year brings in, I can see a stack of games right over there. There's games over there, and this is...
How have you not played that? That's the best game, not just of this year, of next year. It's
I don't know what you're pointing at, but that ain't true.
That game. I don't want to say it out loud. I'm kidding. I'm not picking anything.
Flamme Rouge was very popular. Again, bringing back that simplicity of games that people did.
The app in Mansions of Madness was an innovation. Yes, I would say so.
Is Quadropolis the fall of Days of Wonder? They haven't had a big hit since? That's not...
No, they had their fall when they came out with like Cargo Noir, and they came back from that. So
yeah, and they're still doing really well. Their Ticket to Ride New York / London, those little Ticket to Rides have done really well.
I honestly think for their big box games, their fall was making heavier games for a year. I really do. Look, the River's not that bad. It's just not 5 tribes.
Yeah, that's probably the truth of it.
If they made 5 tribes, they made Yamatai. And then they went back to family weight. Pretty, fairly simple, not challenging, kind of obvious, family weight games. And they were done. People were like, oh, this is kind of dumb. They always were. They just tried something different for a couple of years and went back to their ways, and bam, they were no longer, making great games. I think that's weird, Not to say that some of them aren't that good, like that Deep Blue game. Yeah, it's not that good, A
lot of people here are talking about different games. Harry Potter, Hogwarts Battles, for sure. A lot of people enjoyed that. Carcassonne Amazonas was a nice version of Carcassonne that came out.
Around the world, Amazonas.
Time Bomb Sherlock vs. Moriarty. And maybe the Sherlock Holmes thing happened this year. I thought it was the following year, the 2017, that it became public domain.
It was around this time.
It was around this time frame for sure.
Yeah, Time Bomb Sherlock vs. Moriarty is the yellow version of Time Bomb.
Got it. Okay.
Yellow came out with it in their small box line, but only in French. They don't have the rights to do it over here.
And that is something we started noticing more and more of because
Yeah.
it used to be very difficult to get a game brought over. It's almost impossible to not bring a game over at this
Right,
point.
right.
Someone's going to do it. But it might be under a different name and a different box based on things.
And
All
then,
right.
of course, the ever popular, why are you wearing a cap, Z? Hi, Camille. Welcome to our videos. Thank you for watching The Dice Tower.
All right. We got 2 more of these videos. Tomorrow we're doing 2017, and then Monday we're going to finish up the series combining 2018 and 2019. After that,
It's crazy. It'll never work.
it probably won't. After that, we're going to be preparing for 2 things in not next Monday, but the Monday after that, January 6th, we're going to be launching our Kickstarter. And the same day, we'll be starting the top 100 games of all time, including your picks.
Yes, you got to make sure you come back for that, folks.
We'll see what happens then.
Yeah, all right, everybody. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you real soon. I'm Z Garcia.
I'm Tom Vassell. Have fun gaming.
Bye.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.